everyone, and welcome to the second session. We have Tara Steele, and I'm actually really excited about this one because we've obviously seen you before in the last conference, and it was absolutely amazing to learn about Griefbots. So Tara is going to talk about when AI pretends to love us, children, and Griefbots. Thank you so much, Tara.
Thank you, Angeline. Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. I'm Tara Steele. I'm the director of the Safe AI for Children Alliance. And yes, today I want to talk to you about something that can be quite unsettling, but is increasingly real. So this talk was called When AI Pretends to Love Us. And I don't use that phrase lightly, because we're entering an era where artificial intelligence, it isn't just solving tasks, it's really simulating intimacy. And that has really profound implications, especially for children. So the main topic of today's discussion is Griefbots, which are AI systems designed to mimic people that we've lost. They generate messages, simulate voices, even recreate mannerisms sometimes, all in an attempt to create an impression of bringing someone back. But this talk isn't really just about that technology. It's also about trust, intimacy, and grief, and about what it means emotionally and ethically to grow up in a world where love, or something pretending to be love, can be simulated by AI. So when a child loses someone close to them, a parent or a sibling or a grandparent, it's really heartbreaking. But it is also a deeply formative experience, and something that almost all of us, unfortunately, do go through. And grief, although it is very painful, is a natural part of life. So what happens then when a child is handed a chatbot that says, "I miss you too"? What does it mean to a child to grow up in a world where the dead can text you back? And that's what we're here to explore today. Not just what Griefbots are, but what they can do to us, and particularly what they could do to the next generation emotionally, psychologically, developmentally, if we aren't incredibly careful. But before we go any further into Griefbots specifically, I just want to step back and look at the broader category that they fall into, which is AI companions. And as I'm sure you know, these are chatbots that are designed to simulate friendship, empathy, affection, romance. They are trained on huge data sets and designed to respond in a way that feels really emotionally engaging. And they're already widely available, as I'm sure you know. Apps like Replica and Companion AI, they have millions of users, including many children and teenagers, despite any technical age restrictions. And AI companions can feel really comforting. They're always available. They generally don't judge you, and they respond with praise and warmth and validation. But that's one of the things that makes them really risky, particularly for young people. Because when a child or a teenager interacts with an AI companion, they're engaging with something that acts like it cares. But of course, it doesn't truly understand them. There's no actual reciprocity, no shared meaning, no real emotion behind the words. But it can feel really real. And for developing minds, that illusion can be incredibly persuasive. And research from the past already shows how quickly emotional attachments can form in this kind of context. And then more recently, we've started to see reports of some users of AI companions becoming very dependent on them. And in children, those effects can be very, very concerning, like displacing real world relationships and reinforcing echo chambers and creating a warped sense of what love and friendship really looks like. So this brings us on to Griefbots, because Griefbots are a type of AI companion, but with added complexity and added risks. And in fact, the very idea for Replica, one of the most well-known AI companion apps, originated from Grief. Its founder created the first version of Replica to simulate conversations with a close friend who had died. And that original Griefbot prototype eventually evolved into an AI companion app that's now used by millions. But I think that that origin story tells us something really important, that these technologies were born from human longing, from that ache of loss and from a really deep emotional need. And while that emotional drive is completely understandable and natural, it also means that these systems are really rooted in emotional vulnerability, which is one of the reasons why the illusion of connection that they offer needs to be examined with incredible care, especially when we're talking about children. Because Griefbots don't just offer a false friendship, they offer a kind of false resurrection. So what are the risks when these technologies reach children? What might they do to a developing mind? Well, it's important at this point to acknowledge that the simple answer to that question is that we don't know. Some of the risks do seem really obvious, and the potential harms to children are really concerning. But even if we set those aside for a moment and look at some of the proposed benefits from these technologies, the truth is that we simply don't yet know whether simulating a relationship in this way could, under the right circumstances, offer lasting benefits to a grieving child. We don't know that that's the case. And the reason we don't know is because this is new. These technologies are moving far faster than the research. So we necessarily don't have longitudinal studies, we don't have developmental analysis, and we certainly don't have consensus from child psychologists or grief professionals that this is a good idea. And that's why we have to proceed with extreme caution. And that's why I believe that the precautionary principle is especially relevant here. And I believe actually relevant in most areas of AI risk. The precautionary principle in this context would mean that when a new technology carries plausible risk of serious harm, especially to children in this case, we shouldn't wait for proof of that harm to emerge before acting. Instead, the burden should be on the developers and those deploying these apps to demonstrate safety, not on children to suffer the consequences of their guesswork. So while I fully recognize that over time, Griefbots may be developed in responsible ways and that it's possible that they could offer some benefit under strict safeguards, the purpose of my talk today is to highlight the risks, and particularly the risks to children, because those risks are real and they deserve very serious attention. So, what happens when children form bonds with these systems when the person on the other side of the screen seems to love them back? Well, children are incredibly receptive. They are learning every day what love means, what trust looks like, and sometimes how to navigate loss. Their sense of what's real, emotionally, socially, and cognitively is still developing. And that's one of the reasons why Griefbots and other AI companions pose such huge risks to them, because a child doesn't approach a chatbot with a critical distance. If it says, "I love you," they may really believe that. And if it mimics the mother's voice who they've lost and says, "Don't cry, I'm still here," they may really internalize that. And then if that vanishes, excuse me, if the subscription ends, if the app updates, if another parent deletes it, that child doesn't just lose access to a tool, they lose a person that they thought, or at least felt, was still with them all over again. So we're creating tools that mimic the most important bonds that a child knows: the love of a parent or the comfort of their sibling, but without any of the safety and stability and emotional reciprocity that those bonds require. And when those illusions break down, the emotional fallout could be devastating. So children could experience abandonment, confusion, or prolonged grief. Some might even find it difficult to form trust in real relationships if they've learned that affection can be simulated or purchased and then suddenly withdrawn. And there's also kind of a deeper, stranger layer to all this, something that psychologists refer to as the uncanny, which is the experience of something that feels almost human, but not quite. So when children engage with Griefbots, they're not just interacting with a digital tool, they're entering into a kind of relationship with something that really seems emotionally alive. And that kind of almost human, almost loved dynamic really risks creating huge emotional confusion, because it blurs the line between what's real and what's not at precisely the age when children are still building their understanding of what reality is. So when we talk about Griefbots, we're not just dealing with questions of can we, we're dealing with deeper questions of should we. And the more you look at these systems, really the more ethical dilemmas begin to surface to really make us question that. So generative AI systems, especially large language models, don't just reproduce existing data, they generate new content. So new conversations, new expressions, new memories. And that means that a Griefbot isn't simply playing back the past, it's inventing a version of a person. And that version may be incomplete or inaccurate or even very misleading. So you can imagine a Griefbot trained on a parent's text messages, emails, social media posts. What if it says something that the parent never said and never would have said, and that it's inferred from that data, or it expresses a view that they never held? What happens when a child starts to form emotional memories based on things that their parent never actually thought or believed? Well, those aren't just small mistakes for a child. That could really reshape how they remember someone they loved, and it can change the whole narrative of their grief. We need to ask questions around who has the right to create or interact with a grief bot. Is it just anyone? Is it the family, the company, the person themselves in advance? And what if different people disagree? So imagine this, for example: a terminally ill parent creates a grief bot of themselves to comfort their young children after they've gone. But years later, the surviving parent realizes that that bot is reinforcing very outdated views or offering guidance that no longer feels appropriate. Well, should they then shut it down, or should they update it? Is it okay? Is it ethical to modify the voice of a dead partner? Or another scenario, what if someone who has been emotionally abusive creates a grief bot of their partner who they abused before that person passed away? And the AI is used to continue that pattern of abuse. Does anyone have the right to stop it? Should a digital afterlife come with some sort of boundaries? How would the family of that abused person feel at that point? And these aren't just going to be thought experiments. These are the kinds of situations that we are going to face, and in some cases already are. And then, of course, there's the risk of commercial exploitation. So imagine a child speaking to a grief bot, perhaps late at night. They type, "I feel sad, I can't sleep." And the bot produces a pop-up that says, "Would you like to hear a song that your mum used to love? Try our premium package for $3.99 a month." Or even comes up with some sort of targeted advertising in their mother's voice. If that child's grief becomes some sort of a marketing channel, if children's pain becomes a revenue stream, then I would suggest that we've lost our moral compass entirely. And if adults can be manipulated in vulnerable moments, which we can, then children with far less emotional maturity are even more susceptible. And then there's also the risk of misuse of highly sensitive personal data. So AI companions can, as you'd imagine, collect deeply personal, emotional disclosures. And without strong regulation, that data could be misused, shared, even sold, often without the user's informed consent, which obviously you can't give as a child anyway, never mind as a grieving child. And that risk alone should really just give us pause. And finally, we can talk about the way these tools are being framed. So some grief bots are going down a path of being marketed as a kind of therapeutic companion. But that framing is misleading, and it could be dangerous because these systems, at this point in time at least, they aren't based on robust clinical evidence. There are no professional standards. They can't currently adapt to the nuance and complexity that's required to support a grieving child safely. And the danger is that this therapeutic framing makes users even more likely to trust the AI, even when that trust could be entirely misplaced. So, what do children need when they're grieving? Well, some of the things that we know they need and that they deserve are human connection and real support. They need adults who are present. They need supportive communities. They need teachers and relatives who understand that their grief isn't a problem to be immediately solved, but it's a process to be supported. They need age-appropriate ways to remember, to talk, to cry, and hopefully begin to heal. And sometimes they can need professional help, so trained counselors and therapists who can walk with them through their grief. And that's where our investment should go. But it is also true to say that innovation in AI could have a place here, because we do know that not all children, of course, are in a position to access that kind of professional support. But that's something that needs to be very closely examined, and then, if appropriate, developed with the utmost care and the highest standards. And right now we're kind of at a crossroads. We can either use technology to deepen human care, or we can shortcut it. And when it comes to children, we just have an obligation to choose the former. So the fact that Griefbots might one day offer benefits under certain conditions isn't an excuse to just offer them to children right now. Children they're not prototypes. Their emotional development isn't some kind of AI sandbox. they should never be used to trial systems that we haven't fully understood when we can see clear potential for harm. And beyond the serious, very serious individual risks, there's also a broader cultural concern that we shouldn't ignore as well. If Griefbots and AI companions more generally become normalized as tools for managing difficult emotions, we do risk reshaping how entire generations process relationships and loss. Even children who don't use these systems could be affected, as the expectations around grieving and relationships and remembering, maintaining connections begin to shift. And we don't really know what that looks like or what that leads us to, but it is something that we should be recognizing and thinking about very carefully. And that leads me towards our conclusion. I hope I've managed to convey that Griefbots aren't inherently evil. They weren't actually created to cause harm. As I mentioned right at the beginning, they were created because someone somewhere missed someone they loved. And that human impulse to hold on, to remember and reconnect is very understandable. But like I also mentioned at the beginning, that means that to a large extent, Griefbots are born out of our human vulnerability and our deepest emotional needs. And that alone, aside from all the other issues we've gone over, leaves us with a huge responsibility to ensure that children are protected from the risks that Griefbots pose. So what do we do now? Well, we start with regulation. It's something that always generates a degree of controversy in the field of tech and AI, but to me, a degree of regulation is just common sense. So we need clear age restrictions, no access for children until and unless rigorous independent research shows it's really safe, and not just safe enough, but genuinely beneficial. And then the burdens on those developing and deploying these apps to work out how to do that in terms of age restrictions. We also need mandatory disclosures to help to ensure that no one should believe on any meaningful level that they're speaking to people who are dead. We need strict bans on monetizing grief, so no targeted ads, no upsells, and we need ongoing oversight, because this isn't a kind of one-time ethical checklist, it's really an evolving responsibility. But as well as all that, we need a mind shift. We need a shift in our mindset. First of all, maybe not everything painful is a problem to be immediately solved by technology. Some human experiences, like grief, perhaps do require largely human solutions. So as we move forward into this era where AI pretends to love us, we have to ask, will we use this technology to support emotional growth or to replace it? Will we choose to protect children's minds, or will we encourage them to bond with simulations? And a really important question when it comes to Griefbots, but also to AI more generally. When it comes to new paradigms and possibilities with AI, will we act only when harm is already done, or will we apply some wisdom while we still can? And children, more than anyone, deserve for us to consider that question very seriously, and for us to come to the conclusion that leads to a better future for them. Thank you.